Hello and welcome to Wall Street Vision. On this show, we explore the thinking of the best investors and we examine lessons from the stock market. I'm your host, Vlad Dolgochev. This show is for informational purposes only and is not investment advice. Check out the show notes for the full disclaimer. Hello, Vision Nation. I hope all is well on your end, that life is good, and that you're enjoying good investment returns. In this week's episode, we're going to explore some blind spots that get investors into trouble. I just finished reading a book called Predictably Irrational, which is a great book by Dan Ariely. The book is basically about how people are not perfectly rational. We as people have lots of different blind spots when it comes to investing and money. And the book talks about some of these blind spots. I was blown away to learn about some of these. I think that as an investor, or just as a person going about in the world, understanding how these blind spots might affect you is super important to helping you make better decisions. The thing I like is that these concepts in the book are human nature concepts that are not going to change anytime soon. They're just part of our human DNA. In this episode, we're going to cover two blind spots. The first one is all about how people fall in love with the things they own. And what this causes people to do is to overvalue the things that they own. And sometimes people overvalue the things they own by a whole lot. So it's important for investors to understand this concept, because when you own a stock, you want to make sure that you think rationally about it and that you don't overvalue it in your own mind. And the second concept that we're going to cover is the concept that when you're thinking of buying something at a specific price, that price becomes sticky in your brain. So essentially you get anchored to that item at that specific price. And this is something that can happen to investors as well. So it's important for investors to understand how that blind spot works. We'll go into more detail in the episode. I'm going to share some great stories from the book, and I'll use lots of examples to bring those concepts to life. Let's start off with a story. So Duke University is one of the big schools in the States, and their basketball team has super fans. These super fans are so loyal to the team, and they cheer like crazy. Duke has a small arena where they play. The arena only seats around 10,000 people or so. And Duke, of course, could build a better, bigger arena. They have tons of money to do that. But they keep the arena small because that makes the atmosphere during the games so much more intense. When people cheer, it gets so loud in there. They took measurements, and the cheering was literally louder than standing next to a chainsaw. How is that for adding some home court advantage? So if you have lots of students and only 10,000 seats, how do you decide who gets the tickets? Well, Duke has this system where the students that want to get tickets to games have to camp out in tents outside of the arena. Each tent has 10 people, and at random times the Duke ticket person blares an air horn. After the horn is blasted, each tent has about 5 minutes to get one person from the tent to check in with a ticket person. If nobody from the tent checks in, the whole tent gets bumped to the back of the line. This already seems pretty intense, but 48 hours before a game, it gets even more hardcore. When the air horn goes off, every single person from every single tent has to report to the ticket people. And the horn goes off at all times of day and night. It'll go off at 2 o'clock in the morning if there's a really important game happening. Now the crazy thing is that for the really important games, after all that hassle of living in a tent, the students at the front of the line only get to enter a lottery for the potential chance to win a ticket. So they're not even guaranteed a seat. Ouch! Can you imagine how frustrating it would be to spend all those hours for weeks freezing in a tent only to lose the ticket lottery? At that point, forget it. I'm becoming the water boy for the team. Way easier to see games that way. So what the researchers in the book did is they tried to buy tickets off the students that want a ticket, and they tried to sell tickets to the students that didn't get one. The people who did not win a ticket were only willing to pay $170 for one. Now here's the fascinating thing. Those students who won a ticket were only willing to sell it for $2,400. That's not really rational. Think about it. The enjoyment in the game would be the same for anyone attending, so the experience would be the same. How come that experience was worth on average $2,400 for one person and only $170 for another person? It's weird that they were so far apart on the prices because they both worked equally hard trying to win those tickets. One way to explain the big price difference is that the students who won the tickets started to imagine themselves at the game, cheering their team and having those memories for the rest of their lives. These types of memories are meaningful, so the only way that they'd be okay with not having those memories or those experiences would be if they got paid $2,400. Essentially, $2,400 is how much those memories were worth to them. On the other hand, the people who didn't have the tickets probably started to think of all the other things that they could do with $170. You could go watch a game at the college bar and cheer from there. You could buy a round of drinks for all your friends, and you'd still have enough money left over to buy a nice pair of sneakers. So this research shows the endowment effect. That's a pretty fancy term, so I'm just going to call it the loving what you own effect. People tend to fall in love with the stuff they already have. They have good memories with whatever they own, and there's this personal attachment that's formed. And once people have something, they tend to focus on what they'll lose by getting rid of that thing instead of focusing on what they'll gain by selling it. And by the way, the more work and effort you put into something, the more ownership you feel, so it's going to be harder for you to be rational about it. That kind of reminds me of so many entrepreneurs that refer to their businesses as their babies. They put so much sweat, blood, and tears into their business that they have a deep emotional attachment to it. Okay, so what does this have to do with investing? This is where investors can get into trouble from two angles. The first is that they feel like owners of a stock, so that increases the value of the stock in their eyes. The second issue is that people have this mental block where losses hurt more than gains. Losing $10 hurts more than the joy of finding $10 on the street. So if an investor has held a stock for a long time, and on top of that they've lost money on it, and they did a ton of research on the company and industry, so they've put lots of effort into owning the stock, these factors combined make it really hard for them to be rational about it. And if an investor is not rational about owning a stock, that can lead to big losses. So for the kid with a basketball ticket, it's a good idea to focus on all the things they could do with the money if they sold the ticket. That would help them be more rational about the true value of the ticket. For an investor, it's important to be able to cut their losses if the investment thesis did not work out and if the company looks like it's going down the wrong path. But let me say this, I think it's okay to fall in love with stuff you own if there's a legitimate sentimental reason for it. I'll give you an example. My grandfather was this very crafty type of person, and he would build lots of different stuff. And he handmade a knife for me as a gift. That kitchen knife has huge sentimental value to me, so I wouldn't sell it even if someone offered me a lot of money for it. But if I bought a stock, I should look at it differently. From a rational perspective, I should be careful not to fall in love with the stock because the reason I bought the stock in the first place is to make a return on my investment. And if the stock does not serve that purpose, I should not have a heavy heart about selling it. Before we dive into another story and takeaway from the book, I'll quickly mention that if you're enjoying the Wall Street Vision podcast, please follow us on your podcast app. And if you know someone who would find this content valuable, please share this episode with them. My goal for the podcast is to help people learn the lessons from the best investors and to help people understand the stock market better. I think that's important today as there's lots of information out there that can lead people on the wrong path, and I would love for more people to benefit from this type of content. Alright, back to the show. Next up, we have another mental block, and to illustrate it, I'm borrowing a story from the book. So these two guys, James Assael and Jean-Claude Brouillet, met in French Polynesia. If you're not familiar with French Polynesia, it's this group of beautiful islands in the South Pacific. It's where Bora Bora is and lots of other beautiful places. Jean-Claude was newly semi-retired after selling his business, and James was known as the Pearl King because he was this hotshot pearl salesman. Jean-Claude found out that the Blue Lagoon close to his house on the island had lots of black-lipped oysters, and these oysters produced black pearls. At the time, there wasn't any market for Tahitian black pearls, and there was little demand for black pearls in general. But Jean-Claude sussed out a business opportunity. He was a persistent sort of guy, and he said to James, "Hey, come on, let's do this pearl business together." So those two guys went into business together. Well, at first, the marketing efforts failed. They went on a sales trip and came back to French Polynesia without a single sale. But instead of quitting, they waited a year until they got some better, higher quality black pearls. And then they got one of the most prominent jewelry stores on Fifth Avenue in New York to put these black pearls in the store window display. They also ran a couple of full-page ads in the fanciest, glossiest magazines. In the ads, the black pearls were next to diamonds, rubies, and emeralds. Soon enough, the richest divas of New York were wearing these black pearls, and they were buying the black pearls for ridiculous sums of money. The New York divas mentally attached the black pearls to the prices of diamonds. And that was the key thing that allowed Jean-Claude and James to sell the pearls for a huge markup. The fancy scientific name for this concept is arbitrary coherence, but I'm just going to call it sticky prices. There's other research in the book that shows sticky prices in action. When you start to think of buying a certain item at a certain price, that price becomes sticky in your mind. So if all of a sudden you can get that item for a cheaper price, that seems like a great deal to you. As a simple example, if you're looking to buy a specific type of TV for $1,000, and then all of a sudden you see that the price is now $600, that's going to seem like an incredible deal to you, and you'll probably buy the TV at that price. Now, traditional economics says that supply meets demand, and that's how you get the market price. But as you can see from these examples, you can have a random sticky price determine the actual market price as well. The prices that people pay can be manipulated. Here's a fun little illustration of this concept. What do you think will happen tomorrow if there's two new taxes? One tax is going to decrease the price of wine by 50%, and the other tax is going to increase the price of milk by 100%. What do you think is going to happen? Well, people would probably walk around slightly happier and with less calcium. They'd probably buy more wine and less milk. Now, imagine that you had these newly introduced prices and people didn't remember the old milk and wine prices. Like they had total amnesia and only saw the new prices and did not remember what the old prices for milk or wine were like before. In that case, the consumption would probably stay about the same. This means that prices are sticky in people's minds. If they get a much cheaper price relative to an old price, they're going to consume a lot more of something. But their behavior is not going to change that much if there's no reference point. So how can we apply this in investing? And is this something that happens with stocks? I think it does. Here's an example. Maybe someone sees a stock hit $100 per share and that price is sticky in their mind, especially if they're considering buying the stock at that price. Let's say they don't buy at $100 and time goes on and maybe the actual business starts to deteriorate and the stock goes down to $80 a share. But then the person looks back and they say, well, it was worth $100 recently. It'll probably be worth at least that much again. If people can start associating black pearls with the prices of diamonds, this is something that can happen in investing as well. Now, the way to effectively deal with this is to essentially start from scratch in your analysis. In the stock example, think to yourself, okay, so the stock was worth $100 before, but what does the business look like today? And if I were to value the company today, what would be a reasonable price to pay for each share? Just because the stock was a certain price before and it's cheaper now doesn't mean that it's a good investment. It's possible that the company was overvalued before and that it's still overvalued, just less overvalued than it was back then. So taking a moment to be analytical instead of going by your gut instinct is helpful in these sticky price type situations. The other interesting thing is that these sticky prices are quite persistent. They last for a long time. So if you're making an important buying decision that's going to affect you for a long time, it's really good to consider it thoroughly and analytically. Okay, to sum up what we've talked about, there's 2 mental blind spots that can affect you. The first is loving what you own. You can get into a trap of loving it too much, to the point where you're not thinking rationally about it. Be careful about loving your investments, because that's one area where you should keep a rational mindset. The second thing we covered is that prices are sticky. If you consider buying something at a certain price, that price becomes sticky in your brain. So it's a good idea to take a step back sometimes and reassess if the price is good or not. Maybe that stock that you thought of buying for $100 per share, maybe the company's fundamentals changed and it's not worth that anymore. Those are 2 big takeaways from the book, but there's lots of great nuggets of wisdom in there. I'll link to the book in the show notes. If you want to learn about a few more mental blind spots that we've covered on the show, please check out episode 4, where I go over some of the blind spots that Charlie Munger avoids in his investments. Alright, Vision Nation, that wraps it up for this week's episode. If you've enjoyed it, please hit the subscribe button, leave a review, and if you know someone who's interested in investing, please share this episode with them. Thank you, and I hope you have a great day. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as the basis for investment decisions. I may maintain positions in the securities discussed on this podcast.